Hello, I'm Neil McGregor, and thank you for downloading Germany, Memories of a Nation from BBC Radio 4. At least they can't divide the sky, says Manfred. The sky, thinks Rita, this vault of hope and desire, of love and sadness. Oh yes, the heavens are what they divide first. That passage is the climax of Christa Wolf's famous novel, Der geteilte Himmel. It's a sunny day in Berlin, and I'm in the shadow of the Reichstag by the banks of the River Spree. The riverside is busy with pleasure boats and sightseers, very much as you might find by the Seine or by the Thames. But you very quickly realise you could be in neither London nor Paris. You could only be in Berlin, because on the railing beside the river is a row of white crosses. Günther Litvin, 24th of August 1961. Marinetta Yerkowski, 22nd of November 1980. In all there are 7 white crosses here, and you'll see many more scattered throughout Berlin. The names are some of those who were killed trying to escape from East to West Berlin after the building in August 1961 of the Berlin Wall. Some of them died trying to cross this river, because the River Spree and its many canals not only united the city, but divided it. But it wasn't just the land and the water that were divided here. The book I quoted from at the beginning, one of the greatest novels to come out of East Germany, Christa Wolf's Der geteilte Himmel, is sometimes translated into English, Divided Heaven. The title of Christa Wolf's novel is a challenge for any English translator, because in German the word Himmel means both sky and heaven. They Divided the Sky, or Divided Heaven, was published in 1963, 2 years after the Berlin Wall went up. It made Christa Wolf's reputation. It tells the story of Rita and Manfred, young lovers living in the East before the wall was built, when travel from East to West Berlin was still easy. Manfred becomes disillusioned with the East and doesn't return home from a conference in West Berlin. Rita visits him there, but doesn't warm to the crowded consumerism of the West. She decides to end her relationship with Manfred and to continue with her life in the East. Die Partei, die hat immer recht. The couple, ideally matched in every other respect, founders, as the two Germanys diverge. Throughout the novel, the sky stands for aspirations and ideals, for what a society strives to be, the divided heaven. 2 separate and separated political structures, 2 irreconcilable ways of organising hopes and desires. A couple that should be together, split.
So aus Leninschem Geist wächst von Stalin geschweißt, die Partei, die Partei, die Partei.
Between 1949, when the 2 Germanys were created out of the east and western sectors of occupied Germany, and 1961, around 3.5 million East Germans left, much in the same way as Manfred does in the novel. So approximately 20% of the entire population, with serious economic consequences. It was in response to this mass emigration that the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, closed the inner German border. And then, on the night of 12-13 August 1961, East German soldiers began erecting the Berlin Wall, which prevented anyone from escaping.
East Berliners were awakened early this morning by heavy army lorries roaring through the streets.
From the beginning, the policy was brutal. During its construction, soldiers stood in front of it with orders to shoot anyone who attempted to defect.
The East German authorities had decided to seal off West Berlin from East Berlin.
And it was a success. Almost at once, the hemorrhage of skilled workers stopped.
The flow of refugees was 2,300 a day until the Reds barricaded the frontier last Sunday.
The GDR economy, for a time, stabilised. But although most accepted the wall as impenetrable and insurmountable, during its existence, around 5,000 people managed to escape over, under or around it, with an estimated death toll of around 100 in the Berlin area alone. 100 or so miles north of Berlin was another favoured route for attempted escapes to the west, the Baltic Sea, which brings us to this wetsuit, now kept in the German Historical Museum in Berlin. The striking thing is that although it's now over 25 years old, it looks as though it's hardly ever been worn. Dr. Regina Falkenberg, a curator at the museum, takes up the story.
The two young men from Leipzig want to escape from the Baltic coast, and they want to escape by boat to Denmark or perhaps Lübeck or something like that.
Can you tell me, when does this happen? What year are we in?
1987, 2 years before the wall came down.
So what happens to these two men?
They come to a little village, and there the police stop them and they set the two men to prison. And I think they would have left prison short before the wall came down.
This wetsuit itself is unambiguous evidence that two men in 1987 concluded that living in the GDR was so unfulfilling that it was worth risking death to leave it. There is, I think, something unbearably poignant about this object when you look at it closely. It's not just that it was hardly ever used or that it speaks of high hopes dashed. It's more that it's made of such poor, cheap synthetic fabric. It's so completely, absurdly inadequate for a November night on the Baltic that, had they not been so amateur in their planning as to get themselves arrested while still on shore, you feel that the two men might well have died of cold or drowned or been shot once they put to sea. They could easily have wound up as two more names on a small white cross. And of course, most poignant of all, had they just waited another 2 years, they could peacefully have strolled to the west through the Brandenburg Gate. The building of the Berlin Wall made it for most people impossible to move from one half of their city to another. But some contact did, of course, continue, not least because the transport system of the city had been devised on the basis of one integrated space, not two divided halves. The underground systems, the overground rail systems, intersected above all at the Friedrichstrasse station. And it was at this station that most people travelling in Berlin from one side to another had to cross the barrier from west to east. The process was meticulously controlled and governed above all on the eastern side by a determination to prevent escape and an equal determination to keep a very close eye on those who were allowed to come in. To understand how that process was devised and controlled, the best way is to look at the model that now exists in the German Historical Museum. It's somewhere between a doll's house and a model railway set. I'm with Dr. Sabine Benecke from the German Historical Museum. You, Dr. Benecke, made this journey from West Berlin to East Berlin through the Friedrichstrasse station.
Yes, I did it several times.
What do you feel looking at this now in terms of memory?
Fremd.
It's remote.
Yes.
It's strange.
Yes, and I knew that it was in that time really bedrohlich.
Threatening.
Yes, but now it's over. It's nicht mehr bedrohlich.
It's not threatening any longer.
No, but it was. It really was.
Above all, what you notice is that on the platforms are wires suspended between the beams holding video cameras, so that everything that happens on these platforms can be watched. And as a passenger tries to move through the station, there is a labyrinth of dividers, of walls, with mirrors at high levels to observe, so that as you move through, confused about where you're going, uncertain about what the next space will be or how far you've got in the process, at every stage you are being observed and watched.
And this model was, we think, for the education of the Stasi.
This is not for children, this is a very grown-up model with a very grown-up purpose.
Exactly.
In fact, both our objects belonged to the Stasi, the secret police of the GDR. The model served to train those policing the frontier at the Friedrichstrasse. The wetsuit was part of a display used to show informers what kind of things to report if they saw people buying them. Both objects bear witness to the distress and the danger attendant on any attempt, legal or illegal, to leave the GDR. But they both also helped develop the Stasi's capacity to spy on the citizen and to sharpen the observations of its network of hundreds of thousands of informants. It's been reckoned that 1 in 3 GDR citizens was involved in giving information to the Stasi about colleagues and neighbours. Standing in the Friedrichstrasse station today, there's nothing to suggest that for nearly 30 years this building was known as the Tränenpalast, the Palace of Tears. I could be in any busy British station, Glasgow Central, London King's Cross, or Birmingham New Street. There are the same bustling commuters, the same automatic ticket machines, and the same shopping outlets. Only one thing, looking around, tells me that I'm not in Britain. Nowhere in this great open space can I see any sign of CCTV or a security camera. That lack of CCTV is, I believe, evidence that the revulsion against Stasi surveillance and the huge number of those once complicit in it is still very much alive. Germany's response to Edward Snowden's revelations about US monitoring of phone calls shows how strongly German politicians react against the idea of a surveillance state. And that brings us back to Christa Wolf, with whose Divided Heaven we began. In the early 1990s, Christa Wolf began studying in the East German archives, looking at the 42 volumes that the Stasi had compiled about her and which were now open to inspection. There, to her great surprise and to her even greater dismay, she discovered a number of reports that she herself had delivered to the Stasi between 1959 and 1961. She had herself been an informant, part of that great network of citizens reporting on each other to the authorities. She had had meetings with Stasi agents, and she had forgotten about it completely. Wolf was accused by commentators of self-serving hypocrisy, but there's no reason to doubt her good faith. She explored the incident at length in her book City of the Angels, in which she concluded that her contacts with the Stasi agents had been short and insignificant. But she does not let herself off the hook. The real question, she argues, was not about her actions. It was about her forgetting. How could she have suppressed that memory so totally as to have forgotten it entirely? How could she have been endlessly gullible, so willing to defer to authority? She concludes that her deference, her desire to support the state in whatever way was asked of her, was a legacy of her childhood under the Nazis. She, like so many of her generation, had been conditioned to conform and to obey. Her mind's ability to suppress the disobliging memory she can only acknowledge, perhaps explain, but not excuse. The case of this one writer exemplifies why so many of the huge questions surrounding the Holocaust went for so long not just unanswered, but unasked. And it gives a very sharp edge to the decision by the German government over the last decades to force remembering by researching archives, by vigorous programs of public education, and by building monuments like this one, the Holocaust Memorial. The debate about memory in Germany is as much about what is not remembered as what is. Many countries, in viewing their wars, their failures, their shames or losses, invoke the rubric, lest we forget. It's a phrase that has perhaps a deeper resonance in Germany than anywhere else. For details of more programmes about Germany available on the BBC, or to see the objects and buildings featured in this series, search online for Germany, Memories of a Nation. 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 Nation.